Before we get started here, let me say a few words about this engine that we're going to use to take from no load to full load. This is a 1924 John Deere. It's called a spark plug engine. It's early in the what's we call the E series of engines. 1922, John Deere introduced the E models, and if you notice, it's enclosed. In the root and Vandervoort that we looked at a little bit earlier, this would have been open. We would have been able to see the crankshaft and the piston rods, etc., and even the back of the piston. 1922, John Deere revolutionized the engine business by closing this up and putting oil inside. So lubrication became a non-issue, just like a modern car engine, we could say. As I said, this one has not been restored. It's a 1.5 rated at 1.5 horsepower at 600 RPM. But as I look at it, it's pretty clear that this engine had a life of use. It does not have a lot of compression. It does start easily, however, and it runs fairly smoothly. So it'll be interesting to see if when we fire this thing up and put our generator load on it, will it be able to deliver 1.5 horsepower, and will it deliver it consistently at the 600 RPMs that we'll set it at. All right, I'm going to start the engine. We've talked a little bit about it. Worn out 1924, 1.5 horse John Deere. I'm going to start it with no load whatsoever. Set it up for 600 RPM, which is the rated RPM for that engine, and count the number of hits per minute as it just sits there and runs by itself. Now, one of the problems that I have is the video recording equipment that I have doesn't allow me any way to handle the audio. It has a very strong AGC, automatic gain control, in it. The result is when the engine is coasting, as we would say, it's fairly quiet, and my recording equipment says, oh, it's quiet, and turns the gain way up. So you really hear the quiet time of the engine as loud. Then what happens is the engine will fire, and the automatic gain control says, oh, that's too loud, and crashes the gain down low. So you don't hear the hit hardly any stronger than the background. What you will notice is there will be kerching, 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 and those are the hits, and that's the sound you get because of the way this recording equipment handles the audio. If you were here with me or go to one of our shows when I run this system, you would hear a clear boom, boom, but you won't hear it that way. Again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook it up, start it up, and we're going to run it. I'm going to count the number of hits per minute. Then I will hook the belt up and just run the generator and the jack shaft alone with no light bulbs turned on, with no load. And we should see a change in the number of hits per minute or hits per second when we do that too, because those don't turn freely. In fact, most research says that a flat belt has about 5% loss to begin with. And we got two of those, and the bearings and etc. will give us some more loss. So we should see some hits per minute completely unloaded, some higher number of hits per minute when we hook the belt up and just turn the generator. After that, then we'll begin to turn the loads on to get to the end of this experiment. And by the way, in each case I will check the RPMs. Hopefully when we hook the belt up, it'll say, I'm going to set it at 600 RPMs. with nothing on it, and hopefully when we hook the belt up, it'll still be 600 RPM. All right, the engine is started and running. I've got the RPM set at about, on average, 600 RPM, as monitored by my inexpensive Harbor Freight frequency meter. This is a 1.5 horsepower engine, 600 RPM, and I've counted the hits. And in a minute's period of time, it hits almost exactly 30 times. So if we go back to our analogy of power in the first video, we say that the flying ball governor is trying to control power and limiting the power to just what's necessary. So what it kind of says, if this is truly a 1.5 horsepower engine, under a very full load would hit 300 times per minute at 600 RPM, and it's hitting 30 times per minute. So it's running at 1/10 of its full power. So it truly is a 1.5 horsepower engine. It's taking about 0.15 horsepower to turn itself at 600 RPM. And of course, these things don't have ball bearings or anything like that. So that's probably reasonable. Now what I'll do is shut it off and hook the belt up to the dyno, and we'll measure the hits there, and that will tell us how much power is needed just to turn the belts and the generator with no load. All right, we've restarted the engine with the belt, turning just an empty generator and the belts. I checked the RPMs. They're still around 600 RPM on average, but now it's hitting 55 to 60 times a minute. Okay, at 600 RPM, at full load, it'll be doing 300 hits per minute. So we're at 1/5 of the rated horsepower. At 1.5 horsepower, that says we're at about 3/10 of a horsepower. Now remember, 0.15 horsepower was just to run itself. So it's delivering about 0.15 horsepower to run this dyno with absolutely no load on it. Now I'm going to shut it down before I start loading it because you can see I have to do some belt alignment. I'm not quite perfectly aligned, and when I start loading it up, if my belts aren't in good position, it'll throw the belt. I think we're about ready to go here. I've got the belt squared up. I put a little belt dressing on. Try to keep her from slipping at all. And she's averaging now about 60 hits a minute. That would imply that we've got just the generator unloaded. So let's put a little partial load on it. You should be able to hear a little difference in the hit rate now. I read 80 volts at 3 amps. That's 240 watts. So about 1/3 of a horsepower, I guess, in terms of generator load. We've got to talk about the efficiency and a couple other things a little bit later. But I like the way she's hitting. A hit or two, then a little bit of a miss. Hit or two and a miss. So she's just barely starting to bark. I think it's time to put the big load on. First, let me measure the RPM. 560 RPM, looks like the average. So a little bit of difference, not a lot. Now we'll put the load on. 70 volts at 10 amps, that's 700 watts. Almost a horsepower of electrical load, but we've got efficiency, remember that. Let me check the RPM. .40 RPM. You notice I had to do a little belt adjustment there. It was, things move around here. I'm in the shop with a concrete floor, so I can't drive any stakes to hold anything down. It's Arizona summer, so too damn hot to be outside. I love the way she's barking now. Many hits in a row, and then maybe one miss. Lots of hits and a miss. It's a lot easier to count the misses now than the hits, of course. And I just did, while I was quiet there, a little quick estimate. Looks to me like she's missing about 60 hits a minute or so. Let's go in reverse and listen to it as we unload it. All right, I've taken the front 3 bulbs off. We're back to a lighter load. Notice how less the hits are now and more the misses are. I'm going to put the full load back on. I like that sound. Ah, yes. All right, we'll back it off now. Now we'll go back to no load electrical. With the full load on, or what the full load I have here, you know, she still had a little bit left in her. She still had a miss occasionally. And if I were to change these bulbs out, put maybe one more bulb in, I could probably load her 100%. But we've gone through the cycle. I'm going to load her up one last time and shut off the recorder. All is quiet again. 3 things I noticed in this run. They were, first, that the mixer or carburetor setting is very sensitive. These John Deeres unloaded, you can get away with the needle valve at least a half a turn one way or the other, and they'll continue to run. It's hard to find the center of it. When they're fully loaded, when this one's fully loaded, I didn't have a 1/16 of a turn play before it was running way too rich or it was way too lean. A second thing I learned is they heat up real fast, and this one was running under full load less than 5 minutes, and when I shut it off, the water in the water hopper was right at boiling. Not big bubbles, but there were small bubbles coming to the surface. And the other thing is that even under full load, the RPMs stay pretty close to what they are when you're unloaded. Let's analyze that data. First off, I looked up the specs of the treadmill motor, and it is almost exactly 90% efficient. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is, being used as a motor, if you put 1 horsepower electrical into it, that is 745 watts in, you will get 0.9 horsepower mechanical out, or 9/10 of 550 foot-pounds per second. So there's a loss in the system. It's not a perfect system, and of course never will be. We're using it as a generator. It's been optimized at 90% as a motor. So as a generator, our estimate is that it's about 85% efficient as a generator. Additionally, flat belts are only about 95% efficient. So I believe that this system is 80% efficient from the engine pulley to the electrical out. So what that means is, when the engine puts 1 horsepower into the pulley, at the electrical we will get 0.8 horsepower electrical. Now also remember, in addition to that, when I have no electrical load, it still takes 0.15 horsepower to turn the dyno and its belts with absolutely no load on it. So we have to add that in the end. So we've got an efficiency and a no load situation. So in the end, when it was pretty fully loaded, we had 70 volts and 10 amps, or 700 watts. That's 0.94 horsepower at 80% efficient. That says that the engine was having to produce 1.13 mechanical horsepower. In addition, we have to add the 0.15 horsepower that is required with no load to turn the system. So in that last run, at the pulley on the engine, there was 1.3 horsepower being developed. That's not bad for a 1.5 horsepower motor that's pretty old. But remember also, she had a miss in there occasionally. In fact, I added them up, or averaged them a couple of times. It was about 60 misses a minute. That's another 0.15 horsepower left in her. So if we add the 1.3 horsepower that she was delivering to the 0.15 horsepower she still had left in her, she's capable of about 1.45 horsepower. Again, like I said, the engine's about 100 years old, never been restored. The compression is not particularly high, but she does run pretty well, and she's still capable of producing 1.45 horsepower. I thank you.